Israel's battle against Hamas isn't just fought on the ground.
باسم الذين فقدوا عيونهم وأكفهم.
It's also waged in the shadows of media and online platforms. In addition to missiles and airstrikes, there's an ongoing struggle to counter Hamas's propaganda machine, while the terror group uses disinformation to manipulate public opinion.
Overseas, I have family in Palestine, I have friends in Gaza.
Rally supporters and distort the truth. Israel has been working tirelessly to expose these falsehoods and reclaim control of the narrative.
Israel, burn, burn!
Join us today as we expose Israel's invisible fight against Hamas propaganda. 1. The rise of anti-Semitism.
Palestine will be free! Palestine will be free!
In Dearborn, Michigan, emotions have been running high lately as several rallies took place, bringing a lot of attention to the region. At one of these events, people waved flags in support of Lebanon and even chanted aggressive slogans like "Israel must go." The crowd, which included Dearborn's own Mayor Abdullah Hammoud, showcased just how much resentment toward Israel has been building in this community. In fact, there was another rally where participants shouted an all-too-common threat toward Jewish people, making the situation even more tense. Dearborn, a city just outside of Detroit, has seen a series of these heated protests over the past few weeks. This is all happening as Vice President Kamala Harris tries to keep the Democratic coalition together in Michigan, a crucial swing state that could make or break the next election. And it's not an easy task, considering the growing discontent with U.S. policies in the Middle East. Mayor Hammoud even addressed the crowd at a rally on September 25th. This wasn't just any rally, though. It was held to show solidarity with Lebanon and to honor the fallen Hezbollah leader, Hassan Nasrallah. During the event, the crowd's chants of "Death to Israel" and their call to send Jews back to Poland echoed through the air. Not exactly the kind of peaceful protest that promotes unity. While Hammoud didn't directly endorse these aggressive messages, his presence and comments sparked controversy. He spoke about unity, saying, "The reality is, they wish for us to divide ourselves. But my message is very clear. The values we advocate for here in Dearborn, we understand. We not only want for the people within the city of Dearborn, but for the people across this globe." Osama Siblani, a community leader in Dearborn, was another notable figure at the rally. He didn't hold back in his praise for Nasrallah, calling him a hero and referring to him as the Great Sayed, a high honorific title. Siblani even introduced Hammoud as the greatest mayor in the United States of America, putting him on a bit of a pedestal, much to the crowd's excitement. The rally was filled with emotional speeches, chants, and of course, a lot of tension directed at Israel. But where is this horrible narrative coming from? Which one is cuter? Like for the dog, comment for the cat. 2. What this means for U.S. elections.
The war in the Middle East could be shaking up the 2024 presidential race in one key...
The rallies in Dearborn aren't just isolated incidents. There have been several like them in recent weeks, and it's becoming a major issue for Vice President Kamala Harris. She's trying to maintain support from voters who played a crucial role in Joe Biden's victory in Michigan in 2020. But as tensions rise, so does the pressure. Some residents of Dearborn, particularly those dissatisfied with the Biden administration's handling of the Gaza conflict, have even started movements to block Biden from getting the Democratic nomination. They initially seemed open to supporting Harris, but as she walks a fine line between supporting Israel and addressing the concerns of Gazan civilians, enthusiasm has waned. Though Harris has tried to connect with Dearborn voters in the past, recent trips to Michigan have shifted her focus. She's now putting more effort into gaining support from working-class voters in cities like Flint and Detroit. But whether this strategy will work in the long run is anyone's guess. The political landscape in Michigan has shifted, with recent polls showing a slight edge for former President Trump. Trump holds a slim 0.9-point lead, a significant shift from earlier polls where Harris was up by over 2 points. The race in Michigan is going to be tight. Meanwhile, Dearborn continues to be a hotspot for protests. 3. The problem is worsening. In late September, at a vigil for Nasrallah, Memory reported that the crowd was caught on video chanting, "Khaybar, Khaybar, O Jews." This isn't just any chant. It's a deeply rooted threat.
باسم الذين فقدوا عيونهم وأكفهم.
Referring to a historic battle where Prophet Muhammad's army attacked a Jewish tribe in the Arabian Peninsula. The chant has been used throughout history as a call for violence against Jews. Stephen Stalinsky, the executive director of Memory, explained just how chilling this chant is. He said, "This explicit call for killing Jews from the heart of Dearborn, caught on video, is utterly chilling and disturbing. It is an undeniably violent anti-Semitic chant constituting incitement to genocide." It didn't stop there. Over the weekend, another rally took place, and the crowd held up a sign featuring a picture of Nasrallah making a hand gesture, accompanied by the phrase, "You will be returned horizontally." This phrase isn't just symbolic. It refers to Nasrallah's past threats against American soldiers in the Middle East, essentially telling them they'll return home in coffins. You'd think local authorities would step in at this point, right? But according to Stalinsky, it's not so simple. He said that under normal circumstances, local authorities would be called on to investigate and act on such incidents. But with the participation of local officials, including the mayor and police officers, any serious investigation would likely need to come from higher up, like the state level. Stalinsky believes these rallies should be condemned, starting with the mayor's office. The Israel-Hamas conflict has undeniably fueled these sentiments, and the rise in anti-Israel rhetoric is hard to ignore. And guess where it's coming from? It's no coincidence that the Hamas propaganda machine is one that has the power to change global narratives. The only way for Israel to fight back is by exposing what they see as the manipulative tactics being used. And this isn't their only battle. It doesn't stop there. 4. Fake aid websites. The Biden administration recently took action against the Samadoun Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network, labeling it an international fundraiser for a Palestinian terrorist group. It turns out this organization, which claims to help those in need, has been channeling funds to a terrorist group instead. The U.S. Treasury Department, in a joint announcement with Canada, described Samadoun as a fake charity, one that has been raising money for the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a group the U.S. government designated as a terrorist organization in 1997. According to the Treasury, Samadoun and Khaled Barakat, a key member of the PFLP's leadership, play crucial roles in fundraising for the group, operating in both Europe and North America. Samadoun has chapters not only in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but also in Iran and several European countries, including Sweden, France, and Spain. The organization has been outlawed in Germany as of November, and Israel officially classified it as a terrorist entity back in 2021. A top official at the Treasury explained that organizations like Samadoun often present themselves as charities providing humanitarian support, but in reality, they divert those funds to support terrorist groups. The US, along with its allies such as Canada, is committed to disrupting these financial networks, particularly those supporting groups like the PFLP and Hamas. 5. The U.S. allies with Canada.
Heroic and brave action on October 7th!
Canada has joined the U.S. in taking action against Samadoun. Dominic LeBlanc, the Canadian Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions, and Intergovernmental Affairs, expressed Canada's commitment to working with international allies to counter terrorist organizations and their fundraising efforts. LeBlanc emphasized that this joint action sends a clear message that such activities will not be tolerated and that robust measures are in place to combat terrorist financing. The Trudeau administration has been under pressure recently for its response to rising anti-Semitism, especially after the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th. Reports of anti-Semitic incidents, such as the shooting at a Jewish girls' school in Toronto, have increased, adding to the urgency of these joint efforts with the U.S. The U.S. Treasury noted that its latest action against Samidoun builds on previous efforts to combat terrorism, following the Hamas massacre that killed nearly 1,200 people in Israel, including more than 30 Americans, on October 7, 2023. The goal of the Treasury's move is to prevent terrorists and their organizations from using non-profit organizations as a front for raising funds under the guise of charity. Samidoun, for its part, responded by accusing the US and Canada of targeting them for their political support of the Palestinian prisoners movement and their backing of the Palestinian people's right to resistance. The group declared its intention to continue opposing what it described as genocide and imperialist support for Israel until Palestine is fully liberated. They also invoked the controversial slogan, "From the river to the sea," which has been condemned by many as a call to eradicate the Jewish state. Earlier this year, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a resolution that described the slogan as anti-Semitic. 6. The U.S. falls for a Hamas scam.
On U.S. forces in Iraq, leaving more than 100 U.S. soldiers injured.
In another concerning development, Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas revealed that a portion of the $1 billion in U.S. taxpayer money sent to Gaza for humanitarian aid has likely been diverted to Hamas. His statement followed the tragic execution of 23-year-old American-Israeli Hirsch Goldberg Poland by Hamas in late August. Cotton sharply criticized the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, or UNRWA, which provides aid to Palestinians in Gaza for its alleged ties to Hamas. He made it clear that he believes no more American taxpayer money should go to UNRWA, calling for an immediate halt to all aid to Gaza. Last month, Cotton's concerns were echoed by Israeli officials, including the Israeli ambassador to the UN, who reportedly stated that Hamas had essentially taken control of UNRWA. Cotton then wrote to Samantha Power, the administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development, better known as USAID, to express his deep concerns about the possible misuse of over $1 billion in U.S. humanitarian aid. He indicated that there was credible reporting suggesting that Hamas terrorists had likely diverted this aid, adding that the risk of such diversion was high from the start. Cotton also pointed out that the Biden administration's decision to continue sending aid may have inadvertently prolonged the conflict in Gaza, allowing funds to flow to Israel's enemies. In his letter, he mentioned that just last month, USAID announced an additional $336 million in humanitarian aid for Gaza, Judea, and Samaria. On the same day, the UN acknowledged that a Hamas leader killed in an Israeli airstrike was working for UNRWA, further raising concerns about the agency's ties to the terrorist group. 7. The UNRWA claps back. Now, William Deere, the director of the UNRWA Washington office, wasn't too pleased with Senator Cotton's claims. He reportedly revealed that the senator's letter was riddled with inaccuracies, which made the whole thing feel like a jumble of mismatched facts. Deere felt it was misleading to suggest that providing things like food, medicine, and shelter to desperate people somehow made the conflict worse. He also pointed out that the senator had addressed his concerns to the wrong person, USAID administrators, even though UNRWA wasn't actually partnered with USAID either before or after October 7th. So, in Deere's view, Cotton's letter missed the mark entirely. To support his point, Deere mentioned that the only credible information about aid potentially being diverted by Hamas came from Ambassador David Satterfield, the U.S. Special Envoy for Middle Eastern Humanitarian Affairs. Apparently, no Israeli official had come forward with solid evidence of aid theft or misuse by Hamas in Gaza. It seemed like Deere wanted to set the record straight about where those accusations were coming from. As for a UNRWA employee, Fateh al-Sharif, Deer explained that he had been placed on administrative leave without payback in March, despite protests that even led to the closing of UNRWA's Lebanon field office for several months. Deer assured that the investigation was moving forward, despite ongoing threats against UNRWA staff. On the other side of the argument, Senator Cotton didn't hold back. He brought up some concerning findings from July, where USAID's Inspector General identified multiple issues with Gaza aid oversight. Cotton said there were gaps in vetting local partners and that the agency was relying too much on self-reporting from those partners about potential ties to terrorism. That's a big red flag in his eyes, and Cotton made it clear he wanted all aid suspended immediately until more credible steps were taken to ensure American tax dollars weren't ending up in terrorist hands. The Israeli government seemed to agree, and Israeli lawmakers took a big step in that direction by approving the first reading of a bill that would sever ties with UNRWA and officially designate it as a terrorist entity. Knesset member Yulia Malinovsky, who sponsored the bill, didn't mince words. She said UNRWA was like a fifth column within Israel and that it was long overdue to ban the agency outright. 8. Congress takes action. In the U.S., things were heating up too. Congress's House Foreign Affairs Committee had already passed initial legislation back in July to freeze funding for UNRWA and even direct the State Department to claw back money that had already been given. The argument was that the agency was too deeply embedded with Hamas terrorists, especially after it came to light that some of UNRWA's employees had allegedly participated in the October 7 massacre. That led the U.S. to suspend aid to the agency entirely. Deer, however, wasn't done defending UNRWA. He pointed out that the Israeli government hadn't raised any concerns about the agency's staff since 2011. In his view, it seemed like Cotton's analysis left out some key facts. But the senator's camp wasn't having it. Cotton's spokesperson fired back, saying that Administrator Power and USAID didn't have a robust enough vetting system in place to ensure U.S. tax dollars weren't ending up in the hands of terrorists. And if UNRWA was the only system available to distribute aid in Gaza, then maybe it was time for Power to rethink sending aid there altogether. The spokesperson's message was clear. Americans shouldn't be funding an organization that had been tied to the kidnapping and murder of U.S. citizens. Former President Donald Trump's administration had already taken a hard stance on UNRWA, cutting off its funding altogether. But President Biden restored those funds pretty quickly when he took office. Meanwhile, in Israel, things were moving fast. Last week, the Israeli newspaper Israel Hayom reported that the Israel Land Authority, ILA, was seizing the land where UNRWA's headquarters in Jerusalem sits. The plan was to build 1,240 housing units in its place. This was reportedly part of Israel's broader push to clamp down on UNRWA, especially as more details emerged about the agency's role in the October 7 attack, with claims of collaboration with Hamas terrorists in the massacre, kidnappings, and other violent acts. Now, switching gears for a moment to talk about a different kind of controversy, this time in the media. 9. Hamas controls the media. The Guardian found itself in hot water over a film review it published about a documentary called One Day in October, which covers the October 7th massacre. The British paper had to pull the review after backlash over what many saw as an overly sympathetic portrayal of Hamas. According to the paper, the review wasn't consistent with their editorial standards, and they apologized for the unacceptable terms in which it criticized the documentary. The original review had argued that the film didn't help viewers understand why Hamas carried out the massacre, even suggesting that the documentary was too one-sided in its sympathy for Israelis. The reviewer, Stuart Jeffries, reportedly criticized the film for showing Hamas as a faceless threat while focusing too much on relatable Israeli victims. This didn't sit well with many people, particularly those who took to social media to express their outrage. Hadley Freeman, a columnist for The Times, sarcastically questioned whether The Guardian understood that it was a documentary. Julie Bindel, a feminist author and journalist, wasn't shy either, calling the review shameful and disgusting. It's safe to say that The Guardian got the message and quickly took down the review. Still, the whole situation shows you just how tightly Hamas is controlling the narrative. 10. Fighting for God's chosen nation. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu wasn't too happy with French President Emmanuel Macron on Tuesday. Macron made a comment that didn't sit well, saying that Israel was created by the United Nations. He was chatting with his cabinet when he reminded them that Netanyahu must not forget that his country was created by a decision of the UN. He was talking about the 1947 UN General Assembly resolution that partitioned Britain's Palestinian mandate into separate Jewish and Arab states. Macron didn't stop there. He added that because of this, now wasn't the time for Israel to just brush off decisions made by the UN. If you know your history, you'll remember that Israel accepted the partition plan while the Palestinians weren't on board. And after Israel declared its independence on May 14, 1948, they were immediately attacked by armies from the surrounding Arab countries. Israel, however, managed to win the war a year later. Netanyahu wasn't going to let Macron's comments slide. He fired back, reminding the French president that it wasn't the UN that made Israel a reality, but the hard-fought victory in the War of Independence. He highlighted how many of Israel's heroic fighters were Holocaust survivors, including some who had escaped the horrors of the Vichy regime in France. Macron's remarks came as part of a broader conversation about halting arms exports to Gaza and Lebanon, in hopes of creating the conditions for a ceasefire. This comes at a time when Israel is at war with Hamas in Gaza, following Hamas's sudden attack on October 7, 2023. On top of that, Israel has been dealing with rocket fire from Hezbollah in Lebanon, with Iran backing both groups. The timing of Macron's comments adds even more fuel to the fire. Of course not, he said. Iran was still arming Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, and other groups, while those supposedly opposed to this axis of terror were the ones asking for an embargo on Israel. In his words, this stance is embarrassing, but he made it clear that Israel would continue fighting with or without support. He emphasized that the shame would be on those countries long after Israel had secured victory. Macron, on his part, was sticking to his guns, or in this case, no guns. On October 6th, he announced that France wouldn't be supplying arms to Israel anymore, although they would still be sending over missile defense systems. He felt the priority should be moving toward a political solution, and that meant stopping the supply of weapons being used in Gaza. 11. The US steps up. Now that the problem is getting too complex for the pro-Palestine public to understand, the Biden administration has announced it is sending troops to Israel, marking a significant escalation in America's role in the region. They also offered one of their prized THAAD missile defense systems to Israel. Why now? Israel is bracing itself for possible retaliation from Iran after it counterattacks, following Iran's missile strike on Tel Aviv on October 1st. Here's the catch. Only US troops can operate the THAAD system, which means 100 American soldiers will be heading over to Israel to run it. Now, the Pentagon only has 7 of these THAAD batteries available. So this is a big deal. Putting boots on the ground in Israel for its defense isn't something the US does every day, making this deployment a rare and significant move. Israel's long-standing policy has been never again, meaning they'll defend themselves without relying on others, even while working with allies. This would mark the first time U.S. personnel are actively involved in fighting alongside Israel in a conflict. Originally focused on pushing for a ceasefire, they've now shifted to containing the war and accepting the reality of U.S. involvement in the conflict. In fact, there are already around 43,000 U.S. troops stationed elsewhere in the Middle East, and a few thousand more have recently been sent to the region, ready to defend Israel if things get worse. Trita Parsi, vice president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, claimed this was nothing short of an escalation. The fact that the U.S. was now sending troops, something they hadn't done for Ukraine, was a clear sign. In his view, putting American soldiers in harm's way for a conflict that doesn't directly involve the defense of the U.S. itself is a serious move, one that could lead to American casualties. So, the whole situation with Iran, Israel, and the U.S. is looking really complicated, especially with missile defense systems like THAAD getting involved. In the past, Iran has targeted military sites, including Israeli air defenses. Now, with THAAD, Israel hopes to block any ballistic missiles Iran or Yemen might send their way, and stop Hezbollah's short-range missiles from Lebanon too. But here's the thing. Some people are raising their eyebrows about why the US is even sending THAAD in the first place without a clear plan to step back from the conflict. Right now, Israel's focus on wiping out Hezbollah and Hamas is pulling them into direct confrontation with Iran. And let's be real, any dreams of peace in the near future seem like a distant memory at this point. 12. The U.S. loves to get involved. Jason Beardsley, a senior advisor at Concerned Veterans for America, voiced some of these concerns. He questioned why U.S. troops are still in harm's way in places like Iraq and Syria without a clear mission or defensive plan. At the same time, the U.S. is providing Israel with advanced defense systems like THAAD. Beardsley pointed out that the U.S. is in a tricky spot, essentially supporting both sides of the broader conflict, giving aid to Iraq, where Iranian-backed militias target U.S. forces, while also indirectly backing Israel's defense. Currently, about 2,500 American troops are in Iraq, helping Iraqi forces fight ISIS. But here's the catch. Iran already has a tight grip on Baghdad, and their forces are heavily involved in what's going on. Meanwhile, the U.S. is sending THAAD to Israel, possibly as part of the Biden administration's preparations for what could be a nasty escalation. Iran might strike back hard if Israel retaliates for the 200 missiles Tehran recently sent at Tel Aviv. Many people are wondering what Israel's next move will be. A big, aggressive response from Israel could push Iran into backing off. But the Biden administration seems nervous about that. They're worried about setting off a chain reaction of attacks that could spiral into full-on war. Biden might have offered the THAAD system to Israel to nudge Prime Minister Netanyahu toward a more measured, targeted response, like going after Iran's military sites, not their nuclear or oil infrastructure. The administration might hope that giving Israel this defense system will encourage them to keep their response limited. Simply sending more defense systems could make it easier for Israel to escalate things, and it's not clear if this is really the right way to bring the conflict under control. When Netanyahu spoke with Biden last week, he seemed open to the idea of sticking to military targets. But later, Netanyahu made it clear that while Israel listens to U.S. opinions, they're going to make decisions based on what they feel is in their national interest. So, where does this all leave things? Is the U.S. trying to balance helping Israel while avoiding a larger war? And will Israel stick to a proportional response or decide to escalate further? Tell us what you think in the comments below.